well, but it's such an honor to be here. As Louise said, my name's Alice, and this really resonates with me personally because I love writing, and also professionally being involved with the Wren Project, my own experience with alopecia, and the kind of experience of living in a body that suddenly and immediately turns ill when you never expect it. So as Louise said, the Wren Project we set up in 2020. My friend Kate and I, who met volunteering in refugee camps in Greece, didn't know each other had an autoimmune disease. And then when we did begin to get to know each other a bit later down the line, by that point my hair had fallen out, her lupus was more affecting her life. We then realized how similar our experiences were, despite very different illnesses. And as Louise highlighted, I think the things that we really felt was that isolation, that loneliness, that fear as your life has suddenly changed and you're sort of stuck in a body with an incurable illness. What we realized is that by connecting to each other and telling each other how it's feeling, we were able to really sort of unburden a bit and feel more managed, more sort of less alone and more able to manage our conditions. And so we had this idea to set up this charity, the Wren Project, which we did. And in the past 2 years, we've developed quite a robust program where we train volunteers to be active listeners, pair volunteers with people who've been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and offer ongoing one-to-one support where they have a space to have a listening volunteer for them for 50 minutes every fortnight, and just have an opportunity to talk about what's going on in a way that is sometimes difficult to friends or to family, and really not about the medical, but about the social and the emotional side of living with a disease like autoimmune or like another disabling condition. So I think that's probably mostly what I have to say. If you do want to find out more, we've got a website, we've got social media, or you can message me in the chat. And I'm really excited to be involved with this tonight. And back to Louise.
Thank you, Alice. That's really lovely. And I think that's kind of one of the hopes for this project, is also about building or connecting with communities and developing that kind of sense of solidarity and support amongst so many groups who are doing brilliant things, and so many people that may not have their voice represented or heard very often. So I've put the link to the website in the chat if anyone wants to find out more, and I shall do that again at the end as well. And I was really pleased as well, looking through your website again today, Alice, to see that there's a link to long COVID too on your website, and regarding that potentially as an autoimmune condition. So moving on to the writing session, Jane Hartshorn is one of our contributing authors, and we're delighted to have her with us today. Jane is a poet and PhD candidate at the University of Kent, writing about the lived experience of chronic illness. Her pamphlets include a tract from Litmus Publishing in 2017 and In the Sick Hour from Takeaway Press in 2020. Jane has had poems published by Boudica Press, Dostoevsky, Wannabe, Lucy Writers and Spam, and is an editor at Ake Press. And you can find Jane on Twitter at JEA Hartshorn. So I'm really pleased to be introducing this workshop on the submerged body, writing, water and illness with Jane. Thank you, Jane. Over to you.
Thank you, Louise. Thanks for having me, and thank you to Chronic Illness Inclusion and the Wren Project for supporting this workshop. So I'll just share my screen. Cool. Can everyone see that? Has that worked? Thumbs up. Yeah, great. Thank you. Oh, and also if everyone can, I'm not sure if you can turn your mics on anyway, but if everyone can keep their mics off, but also if you have any questions in the chat, just put them in there, and someone will be moderating the chat. Cool. So as you know, this workshop is called The Submerged Body, Writing, Water and Illness. And here I have an image from Anna Mendieta, and it's her image Creek from 1974, and it's basically in the naked form submerged in water. So I'll just start by reading out the description of the workshop, just to get us started. So in this creative writing workshop, we will draw from examples of watery writing in literature to explore the submerged body. and we will examine how these descriptions may resonate with what it feels like to inhabit a sick body, and how we might use the transformative power of water to write about the experience of illness. And actually, I'll just quickly say, like, the form the workshop will take, it'll kind of be me speaking and like going through my own ideas around water and swimming in the submerged body, interspersed with 6 writing exercises, which will all be 5 minutes each. And I guess these are just supposed to kind of act as prompts, and hopefully you can maybe develop bodies of work after the workshop itself. Okay, so to start off, so within certain religions, water has traditionally been understood to have healing properties. For example, as we know, Christian baptism symbolizes a purification of the soul and an admission into the faith. As well as this, particular sources or bodies of water are also considered sacred. For example, Lourdes in Roman Catholicism, or the River Ganges in Hinduism. But however, within this workshop, I want to move away from this understanding of water as curative, as producing miraculous recovery or salvation, and focus instead on how water and literature about water can deepen our understanding of what it feels like to have a chronic illness. And I'm going to start by introducing my own relationship to water within the context of chronic illness. And I'm going to begin by speaking about the body and health. So, and I realize these obviously aren't binaries, health and sickness. Anyway, but in health, we are generally unaware of the mechanics of the body, and the transition between thought and action appears seamless. For example, we think of switching on a light, and simultaneously our hand automatically reaches for the light switch. We don't need to think about how our bodies will complete the action on an anatomical level, it just happens. In this way, our bodies are vehicles of intention. They're in alignment with our minds, and as an extension of this, our sense of selves. And the philosopher Javi Carrel, she describes the healthy body as transparent, and she writes, "The healthy body is transparent, i.e. taken for granted. This transparency is the hallmark of health and normal function, and we do not stop to consider it because as long as everything is going smoothly, the body remains in the background, the vehicle through which we experience, but not the thematic focus of experience." However, in illness, the body moves from the background to the foreground of our attention. Discomfort, pain, and fatigue can lead to a breakdown in the communication between mind and body, and the space between thought and action widens. Those of us who are sick, like myself, are constantly attuned to our bodies. The pain, discomfort, and irregularity of symptoms is a disruptive force that results in a heightened awareness of the body. And speaking of a short illness, Elizabeth Jane Burnett writes in The Grassling that limbs are hard to carry, the body pulling back to a standstill every chance it gets. And this resonates with my own experience of chronic illness. So like pain and discomfort make it impossible for me to forget my body, the drag of flesh, my bloated stomach, my large breasts, fallen arches, and hypermobile joints keep me trapped in a continuous present where I'm always adjusting to and navigating pain. So for me, immersion in water means letting go of the parts of me that cause discomfort. I feel light and untethered from a body that feels cumbersome and is in the way most of the time. And when swimming or floating, my body finally becomes transparent, the transparency that Carrel talked about. It feels synchronized with the world around me, the vehicle through which I then experience. So I'm going to turn to a quote from Elizabeth Jane Burnett from her text, The Grassling, which I just mentioned. And she writes, she's describing her learning to swim. And she writes, "I have been dreaming lately, repeatedly, of the moment my father taught me to swim. Bright orange armbands against a turquoise swimsuit. Body as small as water is large. Arm against waist, striking out into open water. After a while, everything slackens, muscle, limbs, thought. There is only water. And I really like this idea of everything slackening, of dissolution, of the body mind dissolving in the expanse of water it's submerged in. And it speaks to my own experience of the sick body in water and the relief of letting go of pain and discomfort. And Burnett's phrase, there is only water, contains a truth, as 60% of the adult body is made up of water. It's easy to imagine when we swim that the porous membrane of the skin is the only thing separating water from water. Our organs floating, disembodied, like flotsam, subject to tides or currents. When we swim or float or drift, we take on the characteristics of water itself. Our limbs ripple, thrash, or are carried along by tide or current, our hair eddying, our body undulating. Enveloped by water, we move differently. Our experiential world, the way in which we inhabit our bodies, completely changes. So I'm going to move on here to the first exercise, which will be 5 minutes. And I'd like you to think about your first swim or when you first learned to swim. What kind of body of water was it in? For example, a swimming pool or sea, who was there with you? And if you can't remember your first swim, write about your last swim. And if you can't swim or are unable to swim, think about a time that you paddled or were at the water's edge. And these writing exercises are only prompts, and if there's something else that comes up, whether through the text that I'm reading or the images, then please feel free just to follow that inspiration instead. So I'll start 5 minutes from now. You have 30 seconds. Okay, that's 5 minutes up if everyone would like to finish the sentence that they're working on. Okay, so I'd now like to read out a quote by Abby Palmer from her text Sanatorium, which follows her experience attending a thermal water-based rehabilitation facility in Budapest. And the section that I'm about to read out, it describes her use of an inflatable bathtub, which she buys upon her return to London. So she writes, "When I bathe, the water turns yellow with sickness. And when we clean the bath afterwards, we are washing the sickness away. It sticks to our kitchen sink. Soon the air is clogged with the taste of sickness, more pungent and noxious. When other people come into my house, they faint. I have to blow on their eyelashes to rouse them and let them make their escape. Pretty soon the plug hole refuses to drain. Sickness has blocked it, waxy and grey. Under the city it swells, a fat berg of sickness floating through the Thames." And I've chosen this quote because I like the idea of water as something that muddies, that blurs the boundaries between self and the environment, that can carry pollutants and toxins, particularly as this contrasts with traditional ideas of cleansing and purification. And as described by Palmer in the quote, there is an abject quality to sickness. And for those of you who don't know what the abject is, it basically refers to substances that are expelled by the body, such as blood, feces, mucus, urine, etc. And the philosopher Julia Kristeva describes the abject as that which disturbs identity, system, order, and it reveals that the body is a permeable entity, always on the verge of spilling over. And particularly in the case of illness, bodily functions can be harder to control. And like Palmer's description of the water turning yellow with sickness, abject substances cross the porous membrane of the body. Their movement from internal to external makes it difficult to distinguish where the body begins and ends. And this takes us to our next exercise. So I'd like you to imagine a dirty or muddy body of water. It might be a bog or a marsh near your house or where you walk. It might be the oily rainbow puddles you sometimes see by the side of the road. And I have an image here by Ethel Calhoun. I'm not actually really sure how to pronounce her surname, which is one of these oily puddles on the road. And I really like the kind of amorphousness of this. So yes, it could be that, or it could be rainwater collecting in buckets or ashtrays, or the dark slip of algae at the side of a plastic pond. And I'd like you to describe these bodies of water and how you feel in relation to them. Are they contained, or are they spreading or leaking? And what would it feel like to plunge your hand into them? And I will start the timer for 5 minutes again from now. You have 30 seconds. Okay, if everyone would like to finish up with that exercise, and we'll move on. Okay. So I'm going to read out part of, or the beginning of, a poem by Elizabeth Jane Burnett, who's also a poet. And this is from her collection Swims. And in Swims, or in this poem in particular, which is called Preface, she writes of a disintegration or dissolution of the self in water. Cool. So the river is something that happens like exercise or illness to the body. On any given day, I am rivering. Not that the river is like the body or the river is the body, but both have gone and what is left is something else. To not end where you thought you did, not with skin but water, not with arms but meadow of watercress, dropwort, floating pennywort, against all odds to be buoyant. To feel there is an upward force greater than the weight of the heart, the knuckles, the head, to feel as in to feel it physically push up the ribs, which are bones now. Everything remembering what it is, becoming is remembering, sinking in the silt is the sand of the shell of the bone singing, in the reeds and the rushes, hordes of heartbeats not my own, mollusk onto stone, milfoil onto moss, mayfly onto trout. And within this poem, Burnett describes the moment where the body and the river disappear, and she writes, what is left is something else. And I wondered what this something else, this other, could be. And I think this idea of an unknown entity speaks to the loss of the familiar that many people feel when they develop a chronic illness. As I said earlier, illness brings into focus the internal workings of the body, and unexplained symptoms, dysfunction, and a breakdown in communication between mind and body can result in alienation and confusion. What was once familiar, the terrain of the body, now seems irrevocably strange, and the illness itself may be regarded as an alien other or intruder. And with the next exercise, I'd like to lean into this strangeness. And I'd like to use the line to not end where you thought you did as a prompt for a new piece of writing. And I'd like you to imagine you're lying or floating in a body of water of your choice, which could be pond, marsh, bog, sea, swimming pool. And you look down, see your fingers and toes have morphed into something else. Describe what you see, what form do they take? And I've used another image by Anna Mendieta, this one from her Silhouette series from 1974. And I really, really love this kind of body of work, which I don't really know much about, to be honest. But it just, yeah, I guess it just really resonates with me. So in these ephemeral works, she carved and shaped her figure into the landscapes of Iowa and Mexico. And these bodily traces were fashioned from a variety of materials, including flowers, tree branches, moss, gunpowder, and fire, occasionally combined with animal hearts or handprints that she branded directly into the ground. And as with the other exercises, if you kind of like want to ignore the text prompt and just focus on the image or an interplay between them, then that is totally up to you. So I'll start this prompt from now, and it's another 5 minutes. Okay, you have 30 seconds. Okay, if everyone would like to wrap up, and we'll move on to the next section. In her essay Echolocation, if that's how you pronounce it, Charlene Teo also describes the moment of immersion in water as a kind of othering, or of a disintegration of the self. And she writes, "Even on a hot day, the water is so cold that it shucks me out of my skin. I feel boneless, just a mass of nerves and goose flesh girded in someone's skeleton." And she describes how the shock of cold water in her skin causes a rupture between mind and body, a disembodying of sorts. For example, her use of the third person in the phrase "someone's skeleton" implies a feeling of being out of body. And her body takes on the qualities of water itself, becoming something other than herself in the process. Her mass of nerves implies that the shell separating her from the world has slid away, and her description of bonelessness invokes other watery creatures, ocean invertebrates such as jellyfish, sea anemones, and urchins. As an aside, I don't know, I kind of feel like I identify with the form of the jellyfish. That's kind of like how I feel, sort of in and out of water. And Everybody Needs Beauty in Search of the Nature Cure, the writer Samantha Walton also describes the otherness of water and its capacity for difference. She's actually writing about puberty here. And as you've noticed, a lot of these writers aren't actually writing directly about chronic illness. It's kind of more how they've kind of responded to things that I feel having a chronic illness. So she's writing about puberty, and she writes, "At the moment when my body was growing and changing, immersion in the absolute otherness of water offered an elemental attraction, the chance of obliteration followed by something else, some promise of difference." And like puberty, some of the characteristics of chronic illness are impermanence and flux, when the body may be moving between different stages of illness and health. And as an illness, the body in puberty is not quite set. It's caught in a process of transformation, of becoming something else. And later Walton writes, "I felt my body reaching for water as an element of transformation, invested with the power to remake me in a form that I could choose myself." And yeah, there's the quote there. So I want to focus on this moment of transformation, or potential for transformation, and of the body taking on the characteristics of water and becoming something else in the process. And I'm going to jump to a quote by another writer. It's from Monique Roffey's book, The Mermaid of Black Conch, which was published in 2020. And it's set in a tiny Caribbean village in the 1970s. And it follows the fate of a mermaid as she's captured by tourists and battles a centuries-old curse. And I'd really recommend this book. I really, really enjoyed it. So I'll read out the quote. "Jellyfish had come up with her, clusters of long blue veins. Sea moss trailed from her shoulders like slithers of beard. Barnacles speckled the swell of her hips. Her torso was sturdy and muscular, finely scaled over, as if she wore a tunic of shark skin. She was crawling with sea lice. They saw that when her diaphragm heaved, it revealed white slits which were gills, and they looked sharp enough to slice a finger off. All the men backed away. Her spine spikes were flat, like the spokes of a folded umbrella, but when they flared and spread, they revealed a mighty dorsal." And kind of like using this quote as a kind of jumping point, I'd like to move on to the next exercise. And yeah, I really like this this line, her torso was sturdy and muscular, finely scaled over as if she wore a tunic of shark skin. And I'd like you to imagine your illness or chronic pain is a tunic of shark skin. And how do you move through the water? Does it impede or enhance your navigation? And I've paired this with an image by Dorothea Tanning of the bottom half of a mermaid, but then it's actually, is it really, because it's hard to tell if there's two legs or yeah, I'm not really, or two tails, I'm not sure what's going on there. So I'll give you 5 minutes from now. Okay, you have 30 seconds. Okay, that's 5 minutes up, and we'll move on to the next section. So I'm now going to move on and talk a bit more about the human animal, particularly within the context of Arcadian folklore and the myth of the Selkie. So for those of you who haven't heard of Selkies, the Selkie is a skinwalker or seal person, basically a mythological creature who can change from seal to human form by shedding their skin. And I've always been really fascinated by tales of shape-shifting creatures and this ability to transform into something else, and the porous boundary between human and animal. And in a particular iteration of the myth, because it's also not just an Arcadian myth, I think it's within the Hebrides and various islands. Yeah, but anyway, in the version of the story that was read to me as a child, a fisherman steals a Selkie's seal skin to prevent her from returning to the sea. And she ends up marrying him and they have children, yet she longs to return to her seal form. And one day she finds the skin and escapes back to the sea. And although her family never see her again, a seal will appear near the shore in the children's birthdays. And they can just see the head of the seal bobbing above the waves. So yeah, my fascination with this kind of story was before I was diagnosed with a chronic illness. But since then, my kind of like interest in the story has grown deeper as the figure of the Selkie resonates with my experience of chronic illness. She's never happy in her human form and she remains desperate to return to her seal skin. And the feeling of being in the wrong skin is one that is very familiar to me. For me, illness feels like being a stranger in my own body. And as an illness, the boundaries of the Selkie's body are fluid, mutable, subject to fragmentation. And she exists within a perpetual state of becoming strange, becoming other than herself. And so I'm going to read a poem by Roseanne Watt, who is an Arcadian poet, I think. No, she's from Shetland. She's from Shetland, about the myth of the Selkie. Sorry, I was just looking in the chat. Okay, I've not missed anything. And again, this poem, I read this poem a couple of years ago, and it's not about illness. But I kind of read it. I mean, I guess my chronic illness takes up so much of my thoughts, as I said before, like I can't escape it. So sometimes I feel like I understand everything through a lens of chronic illness, which I don't know, maybe that's quite an egotistical thing that I'm relating everything back to this. But yeah, this really resonated with my experience of illness. And also like the kind of like the seal in the sea and the seal in the land is sort of how I feel in terms of my body as well. I feel very like heavy and cumbersome on the land. Okay, so I'll read out the poem. Let us stop at the moment of unsealing the skin, the body within slipping easily from its heavy jacket of flesh and into another kind of heaviness. Stop before the story begins, before the half-man comes, moonstruck, monstrous, to make his abduction. There will be no need of forgiveness, the hurt will not happen. Here, now, the body, in whichever form it wants, will always belong to itself. Let us stop at the moment's parting, poised between two vacant rooms, like blood moving in the dual chambers of the heart. Let us be red, alive and undone. Let us be barely human. Yeah, and I mean, for me, there's so much that kind of resonates with my experience of illness. This idea of, well, the half man, which is the fisherman, monstrous to make his abduction, you know, this idea of your body being taken from you by illness. But I guess the poem is sort of encouraging a pause or reflection before that happens, to stop at this moment of unsealing before the story or before the narrative of our illness starts. And I particularly, I really love the lines, the body in whichever form it wants will always belong to itself. As for me, that kind of introduces an idea of agency, of accepting the body as ours, regardless of the changes it undergoes through illness or other things. And it kind of, I think it resonates with Burnett's line from her the poem Preface, where she writes, everything remembering what it is, becoming is remembering. And Samantha Walton's idea that the water holds the potential to remake us in a form that we can choose ourselves. So we may feel like our bodies are stolen from us by illness, and we may experience feelings of loss. But I really like this idea of embracing this notion of impermanence, and of accepting that the body is in a continuous state of flux, and entwining this with our sense of self. And I love the way this poem ends, let us be red, alive and undone. And I'd like to take this idea forward into the next exercise. So if we previously embraced the strange, the unknown and the other, and now want to encourage a back to body, and not the body as something fixed and cohesive, but as fluid and unraveling. And yeah, I guess I was kind of struggling with a way to, how do we embrace this amorphousness without alienating ourselves in the process? So I'd like to try and write from the perspective of a stream or river. And are there ways in which it resembles the body? Does it feel pain? And think about how it moves. Does it eddy? Is there a current? Is it fast or slow, shallow or deep? And I'll give you 5 minutes starting from now. Okay, you have 30 seconds. Okay, if you'd like to finish on that sentence or thought, and we'll move on. So I'm going to, actually this will be the last section, and I'm going to finish with this quote from Nan Shepherd from The Living Mountain. And I've reread this quote a few times. It's just, I think it's, yeah, absolutely beautiful, as hopefully you'll agree. So I'll read it first and then discuss it a little bit. So early in the season, the water may be so cold that one has no sensation except of cold. The whole being retracts itself, uses all its resources to endure this icy delight. But in heat, the freshness of the water slides over the skin like shadow. The whole skin has this delightful sensitivity. It feels the sun, it feels the wind running inside one's garment, it feels water closing on it as one slips under. The catch in the breath like a wave held back, the glow that releases one's entire cosmos, running to the ends of the body as the spent wave runs out upon the sand. This plunge into the cold water of a mountain pool seems for a brief moment to disintegrate the very self. It is not to be born. One is lost, stricken, annihilated. Then life pours back. And I felt like Shepherd's blurring of the boundaries again of self and other, of self and landscape, touches again on this interconnectedness with the non-human, and where the body becomes indistinguishable from the environment around it. And again, I've paired it with Anna Mendietta's image. Well, actually, it was an ephemeral artwork, Birth. And for Shepherd, like sort of throughout The Living Mountain, the skin for her is an instrument of kind of touch and exploration. And it's a means of understanding the world and one's place within the world through sensory exploration. And I like this idea of the shock of immersion causing a brief annihilation of the self, in the same way that illness might, the shock of diagnosis or an onset of symptoms. But then as Shepherd writes, life pours back. And that's the kind of sentiment that I want to end on with the workshop. So I'll move on to the final exercise. And I'm actually a little bit ahead of schedule, so I'll give 10 minutes for this exercise. So I'd like you to imagine you're in Shepherd's Mountain Pool. And initially there is no sensation except of cold. And as with illness, you're using all of your resources just to endure the iciness of the water. But as you acclimatize the temperature, you begin to notice the skin's sensitivity. And I'd like you to describe the sensations traveling across your body. As Shepherd writes, the sun, the wind, the water closing on your skin as you slip under. And I'd like you to think about what you touch and also what touches you in response, what other lives exist around you. And I've written here, the hordes of heartbeats, not your own, which is an earlier quote from Elizabeth Jane Burnett's poem. Yeah, so I'll give you 10 minutes for that and then we'll finish. Someone asked if they could see the previous slide. Was this the one? We have 30 seconds. Okay, that's 10 minutes up. And yeah, this was the final exercise. I am just going to share my reading list. Yeah, I don't know if, apart from Javi Carell's Phenomenology of Illness, I don't think any of them are actually directly about illness, but yeah, they're just works that spoke to me as someone with a chronic illness. So yeah, feel free to screenshot. I'd highly recommend all of these books. And yeah, thank you so much for coming along tonight. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that even if you don't feel like you've written anything that is amazing, that it can lead to other ideas. Yeah, just think of them as prompts. And Louise, do you want to finish up?
Sure. Do you want to leave the list up for a bit for anyone that wants to grab them?
I will, yeah.
Someone was asking about the Selkie poem by Roseanne Watt. So
yeah, it's in, I don't really know how to pronounce it, but Moderdai, it's the very last one at the bottom of the reading list. Yeah, it's in that collection.
Brilliant. Okay, should I stop sharing screen just to make sure I've got all my prompts to finish up?
Oh, I do it, do I? I stopped sharing, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, Jane, that was amazing. Thank you so much. What incredible riches you've left us with. I know I find it really hard to concentrate and write, and even I've written something this evening. So I'm really looking forward to coming back to it. And from the look of the chat, everyone has loved it, which is just brilliant. Thank you everyone for coming, and Jane for such a wonderful, great workshop. So I hope it gave you all plenty to get writing with lots of little gems of ideas and beginnings of things to come back to, and lots of great tips being shared in the chat as well, people using voice recording too, which is interesting. Thank you also to Alice Peck for shining a light on autoimmune conditions and the work of the Wren Project, and to Ali Fixter and Fran Springfield and all at Chronic Illness Inclusion, their work, and for hosting us this evening. So yes, for more information and links to the previously recorded sessions, they will all be, I'll just put the link to the Moving Mountains website in the chat. So they'll all be there. But I'm told by Fran that, so the recording of this evening's session will be, a link will be sent out to everyone who's registered. So you'll all get that. So you'll get the chance to come back and do it again in your own pace, or to dip in and out, or to catch up on things that you might have missed. And I'm really interested. So at the moment, this is the last workshop that we've got scheduled. I'm certainly hoping to develop it more, and the project with regard to the Arts Council funding comes to an end in the new year. So I'm really interested if anyone wants to kind of pop a note in either how you've found this one, how you found other sessions, but also how you found us at all. I'm interested in kind of how information's got shared and what's brought you here, in terms of social media or mailing lists or anything else. There is a link also on the website if anyone wants to get in touch with me directly. I would like to set up a mailing list in the future, so by all means forward anything to me, and I shall make a note of that. In addition, I wanted to signpost you to another project just quickly. So I'm currently writer in residence at Rye Harbour Nature Reserve in East Sussex, and one of the things I've been hoping to achieve with that project is to make writing and the natural world more accessible, and one of those things has been kind of in parallel to this project in preparing monthly e-letters, newsletters, which comprise a combination of resources, writing prompts, and different ways of engaging with Rye Harbour. So I'll pop a link for the September newsletter in the chat, but they've been running since January. So there's an archive of 10 sessions, and they'll continue until December. So if that's of interest to anyone, and you want to sign up, by all means do that. Again, kind of the connection is people living with, well, me living with chronic illness, and finding ways of connecting with the landscape. So I'm hoping that will pop up. It hasn't come up. There. So that link is there too. And I'm conscious also, Fran, sorry, I forgot to press record until I'd already started talking. So if there's anything else that you want to signpost from chronic illness inclusion, you're doing such brilliant, much needed work right now. So I shall sign off and hand back to Fran. But thank you all so much for coming and being so brilliant. And to Jane and Alice, yeah, have a really lovely weekend. So back to you, Fran.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you for the organisation you've done for today. Jane, it's been a delight to sit here and listen to what you've been saying and listening to those writing prompts. So I'm sure they will have encouraged not only me, but lots of other people to do some really interesting things. Alice from the Wren Project, it's been really good to work with you. I hope this won't be the only occasion this happens, because I'm quite sure we can find crossovers in our work. And I certainly never heard of your organisation until quite recently. So I now have your details, and I should be able to pass people on to you. From Chronic Illness Inclusion's point of view, if you would like to join us to receive our newsletter, can you please go to our website, which is www.chronicillness.org.uk. Sorry, chronicillnessinclusion.org.uk, and go to our join up page, and there's just a really simple form to fill in on there. We do from time to time ask members to contribute to some research, and shortly up on our website we will be also promoting some external research done by universities in the UK and beyond, who are looking for research participants. So that will also be up on our website fairly shortly. My final thanks is to Ali for all the background work that you have done, and taking some of the tech responsibilities off me while I've been doing other stuff. So thank you, Ali. You've been absolutely star during all of this. I'm really grateful for what you've done. So I'm going to say good night to everybody and hope you have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.